So Kate, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. It's a pleasure to be here.
So right now you're over in Australia on the Sunshine Coast, so enjoying the warmth of Australia, very much the opposite to what it is here today.
Yeah.
In the UK. So we've just heard you've done some pretty incredible things, but I would just love to just start with your mission, right? So you've got a mission with regards to particularly female entrepreneurs. I'd love for you to share with the listener what that is and the reason why that even exists for you.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So my mission is to 10x the 2% of female entrepreneurs that hit 7 figures in revenue by 2025. And why? Well, I believe if we impact the woman, and it doesn't mean I don't want to impact men, of course I do, but if we impact the female in the family unit, then we impact the children. If we impact the children, we impact the generations to come. So that's specifically why I target working with women.
Fantastic. And you mentioned a couple of numbers there. So you said sort of 2% and a particular number. Why those numbers?
Well, I mean, 2% is what the data was collected, I believe, in 2020, that only 2% of female entrepreneurs hit 7 figures in revenue. And then a further only 34% of them believe it's possible for them. So I was like, well, that's astounding. And this was pre-Boss Bitch Business. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, hell no, I need to do something about that. And that's why Boss Bitch Business was born. I was like, I've got to change this. 7 figures in revenue is, I mean, look, ultimately 7 figures in revenue means you're turning over $1 million a year. But as an entrepreneur, you will understand that it's not about 7 figures, it's about profit margins. But 7 figures is just, I guess, a way of showing that we've hit a certain mark. You know, having $1 million a year in revenue, even if the profit margin is small, is no small feat. So it's something that I want to support women in. It kind of does represent financial freedom and generational wealth, which are 2 things I'm very passionate about.
So let's talk about that and generational wealth and sort of your family experience. Because one of the things that I've learned from doing many of these shows and sort of being in the personal development world for a long time is that people that generally have a mission that's got this drive behind it, there's a reason for that. And you've had quite a colorful experience in your life of various different, swinging from various different sort of ends of the spectrum, and a sort of a 17-year stint, which no doubt we'll talk about, doing something that the majority of people don't do as well. So I'd love to sort of delve into that. So for you, if we take you sort of right back to your entrepreneurial journey, personal development journey, beginnings, where was that for you?
Oh, the beginnings. Well, I'm going to say this and it's super weird, but I think my personal development beginnings were being obsessed with religion as like in 10, 11, 12 years old. And I started hopping from church to church and my parents were absolutely horrified. They were like, what is she doing? Why is she going to church with some random stranger that's picking her up every Sunday morning? So I think that was actually the beginning of my personal development journey, because it allowed me the gift of being able to look within in terms of and start to assess, like, you know, what are the qualities of a good human? Why are we here? What does existence mean? And that was definitely where it started. And then maybe even before that, my uncle, which I haven't shared with you, was a disciple of Osho. So he lived in Pune in India with Osho, and he also lived in America with Osho as well. And then when Osho died, he moved back to Australia, to Byron Bay, where many of the sannyasis moved after Osho passed away. So those 2 experiences as a kid really were the beginning of my ability to, I guess, want to develop myself, which is such a funny term because, you know, how can we can get into that later. It's a Buddhist thing, but that was the beginning. And that also, I believe, was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, because it gave me an ability to think critically. And I think anyone that has the skill set of critical thinking and is always questioning to seek to understand and then to seek to improve on doesn't really fit into the employee role as well. And that was reflected when I started to try and get jobs and kept getting fired when I was an adult.
So a couple of things I want to touch on there. So it's really interesting. You mentioned generational wealth, right? And for me, the reason why I do what I do, there's links to my uncle. I've got 2 very wealthy uncles that sort of provided this possibility is the word I'm going to use. This possibility of what was possible for me, identifying certain voids in my own family unit and perceptions around that side of things. So it's interesting that you mentioned that sort of you were going from church to church, and that was longing for something. So you were looking for something. There was an answer you were looking for at that point. And what was that? What was that thing you were looking for at that point?
Well, I remember when I was 8 years old, I watched a movie it's called Cry Freedom. It was about the human rights activist in South Africa, Steve Biko, I believe his name was. And I remember being so upset at that movie and just being so completely like gobsmacked that racism existed. And I know it sounds really naive, but I grew up in Tasmania, and anyone who knows Tasmania, it's this tiny little island at the bottom of Australia where we were quite sheltered. So this concept of racism, I was like, what is this? I don't get this at all. And so I remember at that point, I went into my room for the whole weekend like a complete nerd, and I wrote essays about the meaning of life and why does human suffering exist. And that kind of triggered the seeking. So I think I was seeking to find an existence without suffering. And I thought if we could find out why we were here, then I'd have a damn good chance of figuring out why we suffered. That's definitely the motivator.
And that was what you were looking into when you were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. What's your opinion now or belief now about why suffering exists?
Oh, that's such a good one. I think we choose it until we don't need to choose it anymore. I think that it's our greatest teacher. I'm a huge fan of David Goggins, and he I don't know if you know who he is. I'm sure you probably do. He's like this crazy Navy SEAL. He's meant to be the toughest man alive, and he chooses to suffer every day because he finds freedom within suffering. And I think as Zen Buddhism definitely taught me that if we go into the depths of suffering, we find freedom. And ultimately, all humans are intrinsically wired to want to be free. It just manifests in different ways in everybody's life. So I think that suffering is there to teach us how to find freedom. And then once we've found it, we then don't have to choose to suffer anymore. Suffering is a choice. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice.
So that's what. So I also believe that pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. And I think this is really interesting because when a lot of the time people don't differentiate the two, they see them as the same. But what I think is interesting is that you mentioned that people go into suffering. I personally think, and I take David Goggins. So I think that what David gets is he gets his. And this is, again, my only perception. I've read his books and stuff like that, but it's actually the pain, not the suffering, right? Because it's he thrives on the pain,
right?
But not the suffering, you know. And and that's where. So for him, he might not call it suffering because if he's getting enjoyment. Like, I've never met a single person on the planet that gets enjoyment out of suffering. I know a lot of people that get enjoyment out of pain. Right, these weird, like, I don't know, like you use your imagination of how people get their enjoyment out of pain, but that's what I think is really interesting. And
agree.
What you also said about sort of going into the depths of suffering is good. Well, you go into the depths of pain. Quite often we can realize that pain can transform, and it almost becomes a bit of alchemy, doesn't it? Of what that then can do.
100%.
And Susan Jeffers wrote a great book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, like going into that whole movement.
Yes.
So that's really interesting. So I wasn't expecting to ask that question so early on, but we brought it up. So here we are. And again, I'm generational, and I mentioned my uncles, and you said, I think it was your uncle that was involved
a sannyasi.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And the particular figure Osho as well. So for people that aren't familiar with who he is, just to put a bit of context to this, because I think it's going to be relevant when we talk about where you then went on to next. Because I just find it fascinating, and I try and connect dots. But so for people maybe who's not familiar with who Osho is, who's Osho?
So Osho, So Osho he's like the Playboy guru, the spiritual guru in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he was known to kind of like demystify all these spiritual beliefs around, you know, you can't be rich and be a guru. You can't have money and be a guru. You can't have 10 girlfriends and be a guru. And so every kind of dogmatic belief or idea around what it meant to be spiritual, Osho just went in and blew it up. The guy had 80 Rolls Royces and goodness knows how many girlfriends throughout his life up until his death. And he really did push the boundaries of dogma. And I think it was so needed at the time. And I think you mentioned generational wealth, and definitely being introduced to him and this idea of this paradox. We're taught it's a paradox of having money and being spiritual is paradoxical, when really it's just natural. It's everything is abundant in the universe. There's actually no difference with money or like the stuff that makes up my glass that I'm drinking out of. It's all just energy. There's no separation between it. But I think what I didn't even realize, and this may be interesting or not to you, I know with your background in mindset, but my biological father, who I didn't know growing up, was very, very wealthy. He's actually English. He's from Cambridge. I had no idea at all until I was in my 20s, but he came from a long line of wealth, very, very old money. And I grew up in complete, like, very working class, blue collar family. Everyone worked at a factory. We hated rich people. The rich people lived at the top of the hill. I had my uncle telling me it was okay to be rich, sending me Osho magazines from Pune. And then there was this stuff in my genes or my DNA that just made me go, well, of course I'm supposed to be wealthy. Why would I not be? Even though my whole environment, other than my uncle, was saying the opposite.
Very interesting indeed. Very interesting indeed. And I suppose all it takes is that person to, I call him your key leader. Who's your key leader? The one that you look up to as a kid. We've all got them, you know, when you were in your particularly sort of early teens, mid-teens, who's that person that you looked up to and sort of aspired to? And that could be anyone, you know, it's the uncle or the family friend or whatever that we look up to. I think that's really interesting. So you went down that route. And then sort of in your teens, then what happened?
In my teens, so my father, who I grew up with thinking was my father, gosh, my life sounds like a movie. He didn't like me very much at all. And he was not very shy in expressing his disgust for my sheer existence. And we healed that later on because he got sick and he got cancer, and it gave us an opportunity to mend some bridges. But he was very awful to me, emotionally and psychologically abusive. So then my teenage years really led me down the path. You know, I went church hopping because I was looking for meaning. I was looking to figure out why I was here. Why is my father awful to me? Why do I have this life? Couldn't find any answers
quickly,
there.
Sorry, when you say church hopping, do you mean like jumping religions or just like your local churches? So that's what you mean, jumping different religions?
No, jumping religions and churches, all of it, really. I went Church of England, Uniting Church, which actually could be the same thing where you're from, Pentecostal church. There's a few different variations of Pentecostal, Catholic church. Then I became a Jehovah's Witness for a while. I think that's probably, I did Mormonism for a bit as well. That's pretty much it. And then yoga and all the Eastern religions and the Osho and all of that stuff. So spirituality has been a big companion.
Yeah, sure. And because I believe I'm right in saying that before you decided to go off to university, then you had a bit of a run-in with some substances that a lot of people would prefer to not have that involvement with. So what was it that kind of led to that, and then how did you overcome that?
Yeah, so when I turned 18, I decided to join the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I got married. And that lasted for about 2 years. And when that ended, I dove right into the party scene and the drug scene. And that led me into the path of using methamphetamines. And I lived on the streets for about 6 months. And then I got the phone call that my dad was sick, and I was in New Zealand at the time. I ended up in New Zealand. And to be honest, it's like about 18 months of my life I don't remember a lot of. And people even came up to me during like that time and after going, "Hey, Kate, how are you?" And I'm like, I have no idea who you are. Like, I think I must have damaged some serious neural pathways at that time. And my dad got sick. I came home. We mended our relationship. I still thought he was my father. I didn't find out until after he had died that he actually wasn't my father. And when he was dying, I was like, holy crap. Like, I was with him. I held his hand. I was like, what is he thinking? Like, what is he thinking right now? Because I always think, I've got a second chance. You know, every time I would take meth, I'd shoot up or I'd smoke it. I'd be like, I've got a second chance. You know, tomorrow I'll get it figured out. Tomorrow I'll sort my life out. Tomorrow I'll stop. So I always had this idea that I'd always have a second chance. And when you're with somebody who's dying, you're faced with the reality that one day you don't have a second chance. And that changed everything for me. I remember running out of the hospital after he died, and I vomited and vomited all over the car park. I feel sorry for the person that had to clean that up to this day. And I just promised myself that I was going to do the best that I could, and I was going to follow my dreams. Everyone, even though if everybody thought I was a lunatic, if it made no sense to anyone else, enough of accepting mediocrity, enough of being a drug addict, enough of being hopeless, enough of feeling sorry for myself. And I just started to choose differently. And that's when I decided to go to university, and I discovered Buddhism.
Right. And you went pretty deep with that for a number of years, right? So you went and studied a degree in Buddhist philosophy, and then 17 years of sort of following that path, which is quite some period of time, and sort of took that to an extreme as well before you decided to pivot off. So what was it that, what was some of your, I mean, obviously there's lots of different philosophies, but what was it about Buddhist philosophy, having jumped around so many different churches and doing what you did, that really made you, it really resonated with you to follow this as a medium of, as a philosophy?
Yeah, I liked, to be honest, I liked the discipline. I'm very attracted to discipline. And the discipline, it gave me freedom because I needed routine. I needed consistency. I needed repetition. You know, as Bruce Lipton with the Biology Belief talks about, the only way we can really change our belief systems is through hypnotherapy and repetition. And so it gave me repetition, order, and discipline. And they're things that I lacked severely. And so it just became easy. And in a way, it did become a new addiction. And I'm addicted to my business. I don't think I'll ever lose that addictive personality, but now I let it work for me rather than it making me work for it. There was a book, it was still a book, it's a very short book by the sixth patriarch of Zen called Verses of a Faith Mind by Sing Sing Ming. And I believe to this day, and I still study Zen, I'm not a member of any sort of congregation or organization, and I don't sit with my Zen master anymore, but I still read this text. I believe it holds the keys to the universe. And there's a specific line in there, which was the deciding factor for me to just follow the life of a normal human being rather than going down the path of a nun. And it says, you know, the acceptance of all things is equal to enlightenment. And we do not want to reject anything, even the world of senses and ideas. And for a long time, I'd lived by this idea that I had to reject the world and reject, you know, getting fake eyelashes, as ridiculous as that sound, or reject having fake nails, or reject all of these things that made me human because they were unspiritual. Yet that one line made me go, no, like actually being human is the freedom. Being human is the thing that will set me free. And so I left the dogma behind of wanting to be a nun and just was an entrepreneur and tried to be normal as I can be.
I love that. And it's interesting you say, so that a mentor of mine did some work with some sort of very high up in the, I don't know what the right term would be in sort of when it comes to Zen Buddhism, that's very high up in the ranks. And obviously it's very much about non-attachment, right? And he was saying there's attachment there. No, we're not attached. We're not attached. We're definitely not attached. And that in itself was the irony, is that they had become attached to not being attached, you know? And I think it's a really interesting element. And what you've just said there about you decided that actually, no, I'm going to live my life. I'm going to do the things that I want, but bring in these different different beliefs or philosophies or parts of it. And I personally, that's how I choose to live my life. I don't live set to a set of rules of a particular religion or a particular practice. It's like, what can I bring in that fits with me and apply that and choose to live my life and do that rather than have, and seeing them as guidelines, but not the, sort of the guidelines, but not the rules almost, you know? It's like these would be, you'd be wise to consider these, but these aren't everything to look at. So, because you said you got to that point where you were like, right, well, I'm going to become a Buddhist nun, you know, that you'd got to that point in your life where you decided that. And I know we've spoken privately before, and you said that you had sort of lived this life where ultimately you wanted enlightenment. That was, you wanted to live a life of enlightenment. So what is enlightenment for you? Or what was it then, and what do you see it to be now?
Well, then I thought, like, it's so funny. I don't drive, right? And I always said, because I was so attached to the idea of being enlightened, right when I was a kid, like I had this crazy idea, I'm going to be like Osho, I'm going to be enlightened. And I don't drive because I used to tell everybody, well, I can't drive. I'm going to be enlightened. And it's not safe for an enlightened person to drive. So back then I had this idea that I'd just be like all like on psychedelics and see the true reality of things. Because in Buddhism, they talk about relative and absolute reality. And so I thought that, you know, absolute reality being oneness of all things and relative reality being human existence, a world of duality. I thought they'd just merge and I'd be able to see all things, but I'd be kind of a bit high. And so that's actually what I thought enlightenment was. Now I realize that I tend to take more of a Kabbalah, I guess, approach. And in a Kabbalah, they teach that there's 12 archetypes and the ability to master each archetype is freedom. And so for me, behavioral flexibility and identity flexibility and the ability to shape shift, to be what we need to be in the moment in time is actually for me what enlightenment is like, and being able to live a life of choice, not reaction. So I'm not perfect by any means, but most of my life, I choose how I show up. I'm not living by the programs of reaction. I've found the space between thought, feeling, and action. There is a space there. It's very obvious. And most of the time I choose. Of course, I'm human. I get angry and I make mistakes. But my Zen master taught me this about, I reckon 10 years ago, and I didn't pick up on it at the time, but now I'm like, oh, you cheeky bugger. I know what you're doing. For about 5 months, every time I sat with him, he would be a different person. And I was so wanting him to like me because I had daddy issues. So I kind of projected that he was my dad and I wanted his approval so much. And I would get upset and confused, like he doesn't like me. Today I turned up, he barely spoke to me. We just sat there in silence. He kind of grumbled every time I asked him a question. And then eventually I got the courage to go, you know, Master, why every time I come, are you different? Why are you different? And he's like, because my attachment is not to you liking me. He's like, I'm here to help you awaken. So I'll be whatever you need me to be in that moment so you can see your own suffering. I was like, oh, damn, boom. So I guess the ability now for me to show up however I need to show up in the moment without attachment to what it looks like, what it feels like, who I think I am, who others think I am, to do the job that I need to do, that's freedom for me. Yeah,
no, I love that. So in terms of now, you got to that point and you started Buddhism, and clearly you're an incredibly wise woman that's learned a lot of lessons that you've been able to apply from your own journey, plus the studying you do and the practical studying that you've done. At what point do you then decide, actually, do you know what? Yeah, 17 years of studying Buddhism. Actually, I want to become an entrepreneur. Like, what's that moment when you go, this is the direction that I'm now going in?
It's a good question. I was studying Buddhism and as an entrepreneur. Like they were simultaneous paths pretty much the entire time, and they were also the greatest source of conflict for me. And I remember having hundreds of conversations with my Zen master going, how can I be a business person and a Buddhist? They seem so conflicting. And I had all these like crazy ideas, and ultimately my business became my greatest spiritual practice. But in the beginning, I thought I had to choose one or the other.
Which I actually think that the business journey is, as an entrepreneur, I mean, entrepreneur is almost a buzzword these days, isn't it? But going down that route, and the reason I think that, and this comes back to my point earlier around pain and suffering, right, is that we all have a desire to have certainty and security, and going out into the world of entrepreneurialism is the complete opposite of that, isn't it? It's huge amounts of uncertainty, it's huge amounts of variety, it's genuinely risking not being able to have a roof over your head and being able to put food on the table. It's those things, which is why I think, all right, yeah, there's other skills that you've got to learn in terms of marketing and this and that and all those other elements come in, but it's the way that you have to grow as an individual in your being, and not just your doing, but your being, that I think is the greatest gift that any business journey, entrepreneurial journey, can take you on.
I 100% agree with you. Absolutely. And it comes back to this idea. I always talk about this in my webinars. I'm like, I always start webinars with mindset, because it is mindset. Like entrepreneurial journey, like your success is directly proportional to your ability to have a strong mindset. And it's like, I believe it's 90% mindset, 10% strategy. And so therefore it was the most spiritually enlightening journey I could ever possibly ask for. It brought up all of my crap, all of my attachments, all of my dogma, and it just slapped me in the face with it again and again and again. And the only way I could evolve is by facing off with it and letting it go and moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what sorry, I know I interrupted there, but what was the moment where you said, right, now I'm all in? Actually, do you know what? I'm not. You've still got a very keen interest in personal development, the mindset stuff, the ancient wisdom, and all the mysticism and all of those things that come into it. You've still got an interest in that, but I get the impression the majority of your intention now is focused on this mission that we spoke about at the beginning of the show, around where you're going and what you're doing. So what was the moment where you said, you know what, actually, I'm all in on this? So for the people that now that have maybe got their foot in a particular camp that's been their world up until now, what was that moment where you decided to go, no, do you know what, we're forking off and we're going this way now?
Yeah, it already had a 7-figure business like before I decided this. So I ran plant medicine retreats all over the world. So we used to take people to different locations where it was legal to do psychedelic therapy. And I mixed my Zen and Buddhist teachings, ontological kind of work with psychedelic therapy. So we had different experts who were, learned and qualified in working with psychedelics, and we merged it with the Buddhist work. So that was a 7-figure business. And I was still in so much conflict about how I could be a business person and a Buddhist, and to the point where I was like, no, I'm just going to be a nun. This is too hard. It's just too hard. And my Zen master gave me a book to read called Hoofprints of an Ox. And it's the Bible for Chan Buddhists. And Chan Buddhists are the Chinese version of Zen. And there was this one passage, this one fable in there. And it was like, this disciple wanted to find enlightenment, and he searched. His Zen master said, okay, go out and find it. Like, go and find enlightenment, and when you've found it, come back to me. And he went out and he went and did all the spiritual practices. He did all the walking meditation, because it's huge in Zen and Chan. He did the seated practices. He went to visit all of the other like leading spiritual masters all over the planet. And he came back and he's like, Master, I can't find enlightenment. I don't know what to do. I've failed you. And he's like, well, what did you do? And he's like, I did all the spiritual things. I did the right things a spiritual person's supposed to do. And the Zen master got out his big stick, which they're all famous for carrying sticks. And he like whacked him over the head. And he said, you stupid fool, you just need to be a normal person. And I was like, oh, I just need to be a normal person. And so really entrepreneurship was an easy choice because I love it. I'm good at it. I'm very good at making money. I've always been good at it. I'm good at business, terrible employee. So it was just a natural path for me to do what I love, to have fun and be a normal person. No more trying to be spiritual. It's hilarious to try and be something that we already are. It's the ultimate joke, really. So I just gave up on it. I still practice, but I don't try and be spiritual. I'm not wearing mala beads today.
Yeah, which is this identity piece as well, isn't it? Taking on the identity, like I am spiritual. What does that mean to be a spiritual person? And I often do a something called a happiness monitor or fulfillment monitor with my clients. 20 areas of their life where they score how happy they feel. Right? It's a bit of an indicator to just see where maybe we might need some work. And spirituality is one of those sections. And some people are like, no, I am not spiritual in the slightest. I am not in the slightest bit spiritual. Which I challenge them on, because I believe now their perception of spiritual is someone that's going to church on a Sunday, someone that's sitting down on the top of a hill in tie-dyed trousers, chanting and meditating with some sort of hand signal that they're doing. But for me, spirituality really is about sort of inner peace and harmony. So harmony is how you feel with what's going, in my definition, is what's going on with the outside. Peace is how you feel inside, right? And it's just how in harmony and how at peace do you feel is an indication of kind of where you're at spiritually. But no, very interesting indeed in terms of where you've taken this now, and like you say, now there's still the bigger mission, obviously impacting females, and obviously you're a female yourself, and I can understand that element of it. What I'd really love to do. So first of all, thank you for sharing the story, and I know I'm very curious and digging into the depths of sort of maybe why you think certain things and act in certain ways. But what I would love to do for some practical things, let's say practical, for people that are listening to this right now that are maybe female or male entrepreneurs, or people that want to raise their game and go to that next level. What are some core beliefs that you have, which maybe, so you said, not for you, it's 90% mindset, 10% skills and sort of mechanics. What are those really common, let's say, limiting beliefs that people have, or the things that you think that people should have in order to live a more enlightened life, but also succeed in business?
I love that. Well, one thing that I teach all of my clients, and that I believe, and this is more of a mindset piece, which is vital for entrepreneurs, is that whenever you're overwhelmed, wherever you feel stressed, whenever you feel anxiety, which will happen all the time if you're an entrepreneur, it's just part of the ride, is remember there's two things that have been with you since birth, and they'll be with you to death. And it's the earth and your breath. So go outside, put your feet on the ground, take your shoes off if you can, if it's not snowing like where you live, and breathe and feel the earth beneath you. Even if you sit down on the floor in your house, breathe, take 20 breaths, 4 counts inhale, 4 counts exhale, then go back to work. This to this day, I still do. If ever I feel overwhelmed, every morning I walk in the forest with no phone. I focus on every step and every breath, because that you are the context that creates the content of your life. So no matter how good the strategy, no matter how good you are at business, if you are not holding the right context, the right energetic framework for your life to work, it won't work. So breath and earth, that's one thing. The next thing is, one thing that throws people early on in the entrepreneurial journey is that our Achilles heel is optimism. And whilst it's our strong point, often it means that we think things will work first time. Newsflash is, more often than not, things do not work first time. Marketing strategies don't work first time. Sales strategies don't work first time. Operation and delivery strategies don't work first time. Always have a backup plan and live by the belief it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I've just got to keep going, tweaking, pivoting, and eventually I'll find the way. Those two things are literally all that I really have consistently. Just those two things, that's it.
I love that. And coming back to the sort of the pain and the suffering piece again, is that I have the same view with clients. The sort of the ultimate success formula, if you like, define success however you like, is that know what you want, know the reasons why, take action for those things that you mentioned, which is checking your results, see how you're getting on, and then tweak the approach and deal with that. Because a lot of people, they find themselves in suffering, and that suffering getting worse and worse and worse, because they're doing like Einstein's definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Let's look at what could be changing. I personally believe that any negative emotion is simply a signal to be thinking or acting differently. That's it. You know, it's like, where could we potentially be changing our thinking, or where do we change our actions?
Yes.
Be able to get more of what it is that we want, and enable us to move forward in that regard. So no, really interesting. What the other thing I want to touch on, so I think this is, you've already touched on this today. So you're someone that's literally from a very young child, has been in you've been a very spiritual person throughout your life, right? You now have got significant success. You've spoken around the world, spoken with some of the biggest names in the world of entrepreneurship. You've had numerous successful business entities yourself. But then there's this money piece and spiritual piece, and a lot of our audience, they are, let's just say, spiritually aware. So they're open to the idea of spirituality and what and sort of they deem themselves as someone that's spiritual. For someone that's right now thinking, yeah, but I've still got this belief that I shouldn't have the money, or I don't deserve the money, or I should just be sort of super altruistic and I should be doing everything for free. What do you say to those people?
Am I allowed to swear?
You're welcome to.
Thank you. You can't do shit without money. So no matter how much you want to give back to the world, money equals units of choice. I'm going to say it again. It's really important. Money equals units of choice. If you want to save the Amazon, you're going to need some money. Even if you have to fundraise it, you're still going to need to make peace with money, because you're going to have no success fundraising if you have money issues. If you want to help the children in Africa, you're going to need money. If you want to help your family, you're going to need money. Right now, money is fiat money, and cryptocurrencies are the trading system we use for units of choice. More money, more choice. So if you want to help people, you absolutely need to have money. It's unavoidable. When we go back to maybe trading cows or sheep or shells, cool. Then go and get some cows, sheep, or shells. But right now, it's money. If you want to make a difference, you need money. It's just it. The idea that it's evil, I believe, is completely there to keep those who have it, though whatever you want to call them, the 1%, with 99% of the wealth. If those of us who have a good heart, those of us who want to make the world a better place, if we want to, I guess, rebalance the power of wealth, we have to damn well make friends with money, and we have to swing it by earning just as much or more so we can start to change the direction of the planet. If we don't play their game and beat them at it, they're just going to keep controlling us. And I know that's a little bit conspiracy theory, but it's just what is true for me.
Yeah, sure. And I completely agree with you. And seeing that money is choice, and people talk about financial freedom and all those things, and ultimately it's to be able to do what they want when they want, to be able to provide for who they want. And I also believe that you're right. Is that the things that you can do, the ways that you can give back in an altruistic way. I mean, the other day, I had the pleasure of being able to donate some money to a particular cause that if I didn't have the money, I wouldn't have been able to do certain things that you choose to do, and seeing it as a value exchange. I think where my personal thing. So I've had a big thing with money, and mine is actually the opposite to the majority of people. So I grew up with a belief that money equaled happiness. So from a very young age, I had a lot of, I mean, even when I was 13, 14, I had a lot of like self-made money. I would literally look at something in the paper, look at what it was selling for on eBay. And if it was selling more on eBay, then I'd buy it out the paper, call them, put it on eBay at the same time. And then I was doing all this stuff, working in bars, all this stuff at a very young age to have the money. So I had the money. The difference was for me back then is that I saw money as the feeling, of what it was, rather than seeing money now as the byproduct. And so now for me, it's like, right, if I can provide significant value for people in a particular way, then the remuneration, sort of the law of reciprocity, is that I'm going to receive value back for the work that I've done in a way that's wise that's going to be wise to get us to where we want to get to and do what we want to do. And
I agree.
Your impact.
Yeah, 100%. Can I just add, like with my marketing strategies, I always go in and I go, what can I give before I ask, what can I take? In 2019, I was lucky enough to work with Gary V, and his whole methodology, everyone knows, it's all over the internet: jab, jab, hook, give, ask. And so whenever I go into any kind of strategy to earn money or to sell anything, the first thing I think about is, what can I give? Because the law of reciprocity, exactly, you'll get it back. And the types of people that think that way are the ones that we need to hold 99% of the wealth, because we're the ones that are going to then make it more, I guess, evenly distributed to the best of our ability. I don't think that's actually really possible because of the Pareto's law ratio. But anyway, that's a whole different conversation. But we need those people who are going to actually use capitalism to make conscious change in the world, rather than use it to harm the world. So yeah, I think what can you give first should always be the first question. And then it seems to flow to you much easier.
Very, very interesting indeed. For people that have been listening to this and thinking, like, this is absolutely fascinating, I love this, Kate Gray, where can people find out a little bit more about you and find out more about what you're up to with your school and yeah, it'd be great to let them know.
Yeah, sure. They can just go to my website, www.katecgray.com, and everything's on there, everything that I'm doing, links to my social media. I have a blog on there, YouTube channel. You can just go www.katecgray.com and yeah, connect with me over socials, Clubhouse. I get to hang out with you sometimes, which is fun. Yeah, just go to my website, really easy.
And what we'll do is we'll pop the website in the show notes so people can access that nice and easily. So one question to look at finishing up with, you've had a lot of life experience in your journeys and doing various different things. Knowing what you know now, if there was one thing that you could tell 15-year-old Kate, what would you say to her?
Great question. I don't think I would tell her anything. Is that bad? because I wouldn't want to change anything that happened to me, because as you know, on the outside, people are like, oh, that's awful. But really, like, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I am so grateful and happy to be where I am now. I think I'll just maybe give her a hug and then just not say anything.
Love that. I truly believe that true gratitude is when anything that's particularly happened that we might perceive to be negative, we look back and go, no, I wouldn't change it. You know, no matter how bad that thing is that we might see it, and how it doesn't matter how other people see it. But if however that whatever that is, if we go, yeah, I'll live through that again. I'll go through that because of where I am now. That's sort of true gratitude of being able to be at that point. So love that. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming and joining me on the show. Look forward to having you in the Clubhouse rooms, and no doubt at some point in the future, you'll make your way back onto the podcast at some point. So yeah, thank you again.
Yes. And thank you.
For everyone that's been listening, until next time, make it happen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. Make sure you join Will's free Facebook group, the Make It Happen community. Please support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Google Play. Share this episode with at least one friend you think would benefit from it, and give Will a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Until next time, make it happen.